Today we have with us an eclectic guest, Professor Venkat Ramaswamy, who is a professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business, the University of Michigan.
We as humans, we have subjective experiences of the world which AI does not have. Biggest untapped data, like 80% of the data in the world is yet to be untapped.
Like, how is L'Oréal as a beauty company using this?
One of the biggest frustrations for consumers is finding something that's right for you. Like there are like over 700 products in just like beautifying your face. So they have something called a beauty genius, which is AI infused. It's actually a beauty assistant. It's your personalized beauty factory at home. When I say factory, it's a product. So for example, you can create your own lipstick. So now you use the app and then you can actually create a shade.
Would love to know what's happening at Siemens and maybe just like unpacking the entire piece.
Siemens actually brings up another aspect of co-intelligent enterprise that we haven't talked about, and that is digital twin. So Siemens has built, I think, this code named Danny, right? This thing where you could actually talk to the machines on a factory floor. But most important, you can take that entire environment, since it's a digital twin, you can then take action on it. So you can actually simulate changes. And now with agentic AI, on top of generative AI, you can actually take actions. And these are actually robots. They're actually physically embedded. So there's also physical AI on the shop floor.
Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast again. Today we have with us an eclectic guest, Professor Venkat Ramaswamy, who is a professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, USA. He is a globally recognized thought leader, idea practitioner, and has wide-ranging interests in innovation, strategy, marketing, and he's also a prolific author. In 2004, he has an award-winning book called The Future of Competition, which he co-authored with the late C.K. Prahalad, wherein he introduced co-creation as a revolutionary concept. And today, he's written in another book. It's called The Co-Intelligence Revolution. And this particular book talks about how humans and AI can co-create new value. So let's get started and also start with understanding a little about the illustrious past of Prof. Venkat. So Prof. Venkat, welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yes. So I think I'd like to start with your earlier work, specifically with the late C.K. Prahalad on the future of competition, right? Which was kind of foundational. So for a founder listening today, can you just take us through what that essentially meant? And what is that possibly the single most important lesson from that book is even relevant today, like maybe 20 years ago?
Yeah, sure. So that book came out just with the advent of the Web 1.0. And it had basically two key arguments. We were kind of trying to amplify weak signals at that point, trying to fold the future in as we saw it then. For us, the web was a medium which is going to become more and more interactive. So our starting point was, what if we lived in a world of value creation where interaction was kind of like the fundamental basis through which value gets created? And the reason that's important is that if you go back to over the last 100 years, in the Industrial Revolution, it's about exchange of goods and services. That's the fundamental paradigm. You know, I'm a professor in the business school, and that's kind of what really shapes a lot of business education, right? And so we said, therefore, it's not just going to be this exchange of goods and services, which will be there, right? That's how transactions happen. But that we'll have kind of this broader notion of value, which is rooted in human experiences. Today, we talk about human-centric and human experiences, but we were one of the first few people to actually, we have a whole chapter there on experience innovation is the term we coined, that we have to innovate experiences, not just technology, products, and services. And that experience innovation means that experience is a very interesting concept, because it means that you have to get highly personal with it. Because if I were to create a product for Jerome, right, in principle, I can create it independent of you. Yes, today we know that's not a good thing to do. I would just get your feedback, etc. Right? We as humans, we have subjective experiences of the world, which AI does not have. At least that's our perspective. So AI, the way we look at it is that, hey, it's a different kind of intelligence. It's very useful, but it does not have our first world subjective experience, right? That we have, like as we speak now. So we as humans bring that context to that experience, and AI is very fantastic in terms of bringing a lot of the knowledge that it has, right, in helping us in various ways, and we can talk about it. And so we see this as, to use an Indian term, a Jugalbandi. All right, it is like, hey, it's this a symbiosis or a creative improvisation between humans and AI. And we believe that way of looking at value creation moving forward is where at least we believe how the future is becoming. That is the potential for humans and AI to co-create new forms of value. And so if you're a startup today, we believe that that's the perspective you need to take. And we can talk more about, like, double click on and say, what are the things that are like accelerating this kind of movement towards human AI symbiosis.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great segue, right? So now that you speak that, co-intelligence and humans and AI will kind of co-create. So with that happening and with the onset of such a big revolution right now, where are the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurs?
We are actually driving through this new uh, form of computing, which involves not the traditional computing, but based on the NVIDIA stack. What is basically providing is a new way by which you can create value through what he calls as AI factories. Now, these are more than just like data centers with AI, right? Because they're actually producing intelligence. So that's really the starting point in the book. That is, now we are in this new revolution where we are producing intelligence through, of course, if you look at transformers, it takes the form of producing tokens. Now, that's very important because that has never happened in human history before, where you have factories producing tokens, right? So that basically means that these tokens must create value. Going back to what I'm saying, this.
Yeah, so what I'd like to hear is, because you've done so much research for the book and talked to global enterprises, right? In this layer of, say, infrastructure, maybe if you can quote some examples from enterprises or startups you've kind of spoken to, what are they building, which is
Yeah,
kind of playing on this layer of co-intelligence?
absolutely. And so I think it'll be useful to take an example here. So actually, the example that we used to kick off the book with, I think, is interesting because it kind of straddles both. So maybe it's a one example that will serve both. So the example we take is actually called Jugalbandi, right? Which happened like just a week after ChatGPT was came out, right? So released kind of from San Francisco, and somebody in Bengaluru decides to build an application from it. So volunteer developers from different sectors. So you have from the kind of the plural sector, if you will, like volunteer developers, citizen developers. Then you have from not-for-profits, but you also had uh, people from Microsoft Research. Then you had people from IIT Madras, so from the academic side, if you will. So these were just people who got together because this is open source in the sense that you can download and utilize it, right? And you actually have it's actually the API that's available. So it's not open source as in Mistral or Llama models. That's not what I mean, because you're downloading this, but you as a developer can build using it. So the point is that what people did is took the government service Bhashini, which was a service available in terms of language translation, then took the open AI APIs, and then in WhatsApp built this application for farmers to access government public services. So we find that example very fascinating because it basically says that here is an application where the farmer, now if you look at it from the farmer's perspective, as a user interacting with this application, it's a co-intelligence at work because I just talk to it in my natural language, and it comes back and it says, okay, here's what you're eligible for. Now, if you just were to pause here, this is huge because until now, to program computers, you needed a programming language, right? You need to know something, right? I learned Fortran way back when, right? Or you use Python, etc. now. But here, the ordinary person can actually speak to it. And today, as we know, we can even, talk to it and, it goes off and does things, right? It can write the software and come back and build the application for you. So I think this is very transformative because now you have a service that is getting created. But here's the key question. No matter, so for example, this has evolved now into, from the government side, PM Kisan, right? There are private sector entities that have leveraged this as a startups, right? And building new models. You have Servam.ai, which is actually building foundational model itself. Then you have other people focusing more on the application side. But in each one of them, again, coming back to whether you're working this infrastructure layer or going about to the platform layer, or really to the broader applications layer, in every, depending on how you actually participate in here, the key question is, for whom are you creating value, right? How are you creating new flows of value with people? And how does it create new experiences that's valued? How are you managing the risk in the process of creating the value? And how are you then coming back and growing the ecosystem? Because as the ecosystem grows, then you get new pools of value that gets created. And how are you? What are you doing to accelerate the way in which the service is getting used, right? And most important, are you using those same AI capabilities not only to deliver the service, but to actually get insights? So, for instance, now that I can talk, it's not just I'm talking to access the service. In Jugalbandi, what they also do is they do two things. One is they ask the farmer, what is your experience now of actually using it? And all he does is he just talks. So to me, this is completely brand new type of market research, right? Where the user can just simply express themselves. You don't have to go and try to guess, right, where the value is coming, where the problems might lie. So that's one thing they do is huge. But the second thing they also do is that now that I have this voice capability, why can't I actually also learn more about, hey, okay, you're getting the funds in here. What are some other things that you would like to do in your life world? That is, in your farming, what services would you like have access to, right? Whether it comes to like fertilizers or you're trying to decide a crop rotation cycle. So we really, for the first time, can actually get deep into the lives of people, right? And say, hey, unlock new forms of value there. And then say, what is the ecosystem of services that you need to bring to provide that value? So today, as an instance, ITC, which is now from the private sector side, has built applications where you have all these things underneath, right? The farmer can access all these government services, but now it is able to actually bring new value to the farmer because it has created a marketplace called Mars. Now, this is a large established company where actually startups can plug in their services, whether it's for irrigation or for planting, or it could be fertilizers, or very selective use of pesticides, etc. Right? But a lot of it is flowing from the intelligence from the farmer side. The farmer says, "I have this problem. Who can help me?" Right? So it's a very different notion of marketplace where it's not just transactional, like going back to where we started, exchanging goods and services, but we're really trying to co-create experiences. That's very different because the farmer, yes, he has now the income because let's say he has access to the scheme, but now he wants to turn that over, right? He wants to put it to good use. But he's really looking for value, right? Saying, hey, it must work on my farm, in my soil, for my application. So how do you get that deep understanding? If you're a startup, you have very limited resources. So what this platform does is it actually uses AI to surface a lot of the insights. And then, different people can provide different services. So in some sense, you have to ask yourself, how can you plug yourself into an ecosystem which is built on top of this more public infrastructure? And it's the all of these things being connected together that unlocks new value.
Got it. Awesome. So any particular numbers on how many farmers in the country use Jugalbandi? Would love to
So
hear
PM
it.
Kisan app, my understanding is like it's already, actually the first year itself was over 120 million. And I think it's probably gone beyond that. And in over like 8 to 10 states, it's probably even gone beyond that. That was when we were writing in the book. And uh, now the other point is that Microsoft itself has built something called agripilot.ai in Baramati, in Maharashtra. The Jugalbandi was actually in Bhiwan, right, Haryana. So here in this pilot, they worked together with the government and worked with sugarcane farmers and actually shown that it increases yield, as much as 40%, right, 20 to 40% range, depending upon what you look at. It has obviously brought a lot of resource efficiency, like obviously being able to consume less water, less fertilizers, and so it brings also the cost down and has improved the yield for farmers. And this is actual evidence. If you go to their website, you'll see that, and they've been updating it. So that's an example. But I think the point I want to make here is that you have a large established enterprise benefiting. You have startups playing. In fact, in the Mars marketplace, different startups can plug in their services right into that marketplace. So I think we are in a world where it's not like either or. You're going to have value being unlocked uh, across public services, private services, large, uh, small, medium. We can even talk more about small, medium businesses, but also startups that bring different kinds of services that can be plugged in. So it really depends on like who's orchestrating the system, and are you actually a startup that's trying to become an orchestrator, or are you trying to plug into an existing system where you are actually interacting with parties? But the key point I want to make is that you're really creating an ecosystem of experiences, of interactive experiences. That's the mindset to have, and not be just stuck on just the current technology, because a lot of the advances in generative AI are facilitating like these new forms of interactive interfaces. But the question really is, how does that then cycle back in terms of actually creating value for the people, the humans on the other side who are actually utilizing it?
Got it. So I think that kind of, I was very intrigued about the L'Oreal piece, which was kind of there on the description, right? Like, how is L'Oreal as a beauty company using this? Because it's very interactive. I mean, it's an age-old industry where people are kind of been using this product. So how does this play out in L'Oreal, which is a very physical
Yeah,
space?
so the example I think we have talked about so far, and mainly at a
Yeah.
societal level.
Hmm.
So if you get to kind of uh, industries such as beauty, and we can
Yeah.
also talk about
Yeah.
Siemens. That's
Yeah.
another detailed example of the book. And we chose
Hmm.
those two. So the
Hmm.
book has over 100 examples,
Okay.
and it cuts across 25 ecosystems. And we have over 90 CXOs featured in the book, and we can get into some of that. But we picked these two. We featured this in chapter 2 of the book because we wanted to do a deep dive, taking like just two, like one detailed example. So one is business to consumer, L'Oreal, and the other one is business to business, Siemens. But let's unpack those two examples, and then we can
Okay.
see, okay, there are obviously implications for large companies in there, right? In the L'Oreal ecosystem, Siemens, which are very big enterprises, but they work with a lot of startups, right?
Hmm.
And everything in between. So let's take L'Oreal. So L'Oreal is very interesting because if you take traditional consumer goods industry, beauty in this case, L'Oreal has always produced a lot of beauty products. I think they have about 37 brands. And one of the interesting things there is that despite all that choice, one of the biggest frustrations for consumers is finding something that's right for you. Like there are like over 700 products in just like, beautifying your face. So like, how do you know what works for you?
Hmm.
Now, actually, fundamentally, this is no different from what we were talking about before. So I'll draw parallels. It's no different than the farmer saying, okay, now you have a marketplace. Now I can have so many kinds of services from all these different people, but which one will work for me, right? He also has the same problem of wading through all the choice and figuring out what works on his farm for his soil. Similarly, what works here for the beauty products for my face, for my skin type, right? And my allergies. So I think that's where, like, of course, L'Oreal has been investing in R&D in beauty science for over a century, right? And that's the other thing. This is a very established company, right? Over a century old, and both Siemens and L'Oreal. So the point here is that what is happening there is that not only is, as I'll describe, is what we're talking about, like transforming the way people can interact with the offerings, but the nature of the offering itself changes. So that's the first point. Second point is that, and so what I want to focus more on, is completely transforming the value chain.
Hmm.
Because L'Oreal has a traditional value chain. Even in the traditional value chain, how work actually gets done, and also creating new flows and new ecosystem models. So let's unpack it. So the first part of L'Oreal is, okay, in the existing products, how do I find a product that matches my skin, right? So they have something called a Beauty Genius, which is AI infused. It's actually a beauty assistant, which is built on top of like a dozen LLM models, which have been trained in terms of all of L'Oreal's internal corpus of data. Is actually fine-tuned and distilled based on the foundation models. which makes a very important point, which is that as you go from the infrastructure to the platform level, and slowly I think we're going up the stack now, right? With the L'Oreal example and Siemens example, as you go up the stack, and that's where L'Oreal finds the value in using these models, right? As a customer of these models. What is very interesting is that uh, while the LLMs have been trained on the public internet data, the biggest untapped data, like 80% of the data in the world is yet to be untapped. We all talk about, hey, where are we going to train these models from, synthetic data and so on. There is that big opportunity which lies inside enterprises. But right now, where we see biggest use is actually enterprises using the data, but more in terms of inferencing, that is from fine tuning and distilling these models and putting it to work for them and using it in terms of inferencing both internally and also externally with the customers. So that's where the action is. But these companies like Siemens is already starting to build its own foundation models. So I think one of the biggest areas of opportunity is inside enterprises, right? Where as they utilize this is completely transforming entire workflow end to end of enterprises. So in the case of L'Oreal, so if you take their beauty products, right? So one of the beauty advisor, the beauty genius does is it will scan your face and you can actually do virtual try-ons. You can talk to it in your local language and it will suggest things. So it's just like having an assistant. It's like going to a store where you might interact with a beauty advisor, right? Now that is an experience you can have right on the app. But it gets better because that's kind of where they started using Modi Face, which is a startup whose technology is whom they acquired, right? And so that augmented reality technology is part of this. So obviously, there's a lot of opportunities for startups to integrate themselves into these enterprise offerings and value chains. So in this example, what happened is that they also then created actually a product factory that is like, it's called Porso. It's your personalized beauty factory at home. When I say factory, it's a product. So for example, you can create your own lipstick. So now you use the app and then you can actually create a shade and then it will actually mix the ingredients for you. And I've actually seen it at work and it's just amazing. I mean, you can do it yourself, but that's not a product I use. But from talking to people who actually use it, for them, it's just like amazing because they can actually have a personalized beauty routine. And you can match this with your dress, with your, your particular routine that day. And here's the important part, it learns from you. And so, like if today, like it's hotter and it's more humid, you can adjust it, right? And then just like the pharma example, it'll ask you for feedback, how the product was, how did it feel, right? So you can bring your own taste and subjective experience to it. I think that's very, very important. And so the algorithm like learns from you and it helps you produce a very personalized experience, right? Every time, every day, every time of day. Now, going into the value chain of L'Oreal, if you look at the marketing function, completely transformed. Because now what they have done is saying, okay, if you go back to the products, let's say it might recommend a product for you, and then you say, okay, I want to buy this, and then it says it's out of stock. Well, that's not a good experience, right? So you can see that you have to drive this throughout the supply chain, actually, right? So what they have is the Beauty Genius itself is a mini ecosystem. This is important. It's not just an app. It's a mini ecosystem where all the different suppliers are plugged into it, which is, by the way, exactly how the ITC is. Conceptually, it's the same. ITC says, I started the farmer, now he's interacting, and he has certain needs, and then it activates the entire supply chain ecosystem, right, in terms of providing services back to the farmer. So in some sense, for having kind of an n equals 1 experience, you just need like this kind of very resourced ecosystem, right? Which in many cases is global and in fact has infinite possibilities today. So in the case, coming back to the marketing example, so when they have to generate, for example, ad copy, right? Have video shoots. Within that, they use AI to actually create, have lots of ideation discussions together with their ad agency, for instance, right? They work with WPP, for instance. So even if you just take that sphere of interactions, I think what is important to see here is that it's transforming the way we work, right? The work artifacts that get produced, how we produce them. And so what used to take like literally 12 months, 10 to 12 months, now they can do it within a month. So that's the kind of time compression you're talking about. So the speed to that value goes up. But also, it's not just the speed. If you talk to them, they'll tell you all these stories about, oh, it's not just, oh, it's done faster. But, now that we're able to do this fast, it helps us do that fast. And it helps us bring, like Jerome and his friends on board before, like, we won't have time to talk to them. And we know that insights can be valuable, but we don't have time because as it is, it's taking 10, 12 months. But now that we have compressed this, we can actually get more insighting done. So it's a lot of the soft things that they talk about, but that's what I call like creating better experiences for people. That is where they find the value is. So all the tooling, artifacts that are utilized in here all help facilitate that interaction between various entities inside L'Oréal and their communication partners. I'm just taking this example of this marketing process. The same thing with the sales, service, customer-facing process in their factories, production, the packaging, all of that. So in each sphere, co-intelligence is at work, and it's all connected ultimately in terms of creating this beauty for each experience at L'Oréal. So that's just a L'Oréal example. We can pause here because we have a similar large story with Siemens.
Perfect. I think that's phenomenal. I mean, I was trying to imagine a user kind of going through this experience. Definitely sounds fascinating. Any before we move on to the Siemens piece, any quick numbers or maybe like any insight, interesting stories on how this has been perceived by the customers? How has it kind of
So it's a
changed
big
the way the
success
business,
story.
yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of the
And
business numbers?
they've invested over
Hmm.
€1 billion in this
Hmm.
AI-based approach
Hmm.
because remember they have 37 brands. It was rolled out I think, for Yves Saint Laurent brand. Now it's coming across all the other brands.
Hmm.
And for different applications, we're working with skincare, dermatologists. So in other words, this is, highly transformational. This
Yeah.
is not just like, oh, there's something cute or interesting we're doing here and there. It's completely transforming the enterprise end to end. That's what I want the viewers, listeners to kind of take away is that every enterprise, I argue, will become a co-intelligent enterprise in the book. And at the bottom, you're going to have this infrastructure layer with all the AI factories. So the AI factories are actually, so the intelligence is getting produced. So as I'm interacting, it's not like the old model, I capture it, I put it in some database somewhere, I create some profile. No, no, no. This is an AI model running. It's inferencing in real time. It's very important. And so it is learning from me. It's like when I interact with ChatGPT, it's not like it's sticking into some database somewhere. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's actually intelligence that is interacting with me. And so when I talk to it tomorrow based on yesterday's use of the product, I have a different conversation. So the user is very involved with this. So what they find is that people are very engaged, and when it works for them, it completely transforms the experience. But most important, it creates a unique, sticky brand experience, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, of course, their competitors are also doing this. So the point here is that yes, but your focus is on continuously enhancing experience. But for your audience, focus, like for example, if you're a startup entrepreneur,
Yeah.
I think one of the important takeaways, at least that kind of, even for me, it was a takeaway, and then I expressed in the book, was what I was finding is, see, this is not just about creating customer experience, or you say employee experience. It's really how all these are actually connected, right? In other
Hmm.
words, you are in the business of experiences. You see what I'm saying? So this is not like, let's improve the UI there. Okay, I have a great thing. You set me up. I got excited. I am not able to buy the product now, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but to buy the product, it cuts across all channels, right? You have to have all of that in there. And then now what happens to your beauty advisors? Oh, then my beauty advisors now, I don't have to go to the store. They can come on. I could have a chat with them. So a lot of
Hmm.
it is the tech sophistication of bringing those capabilities in, but it's really an ecosystem play.
Hmm.
It's not an isolated thing. So I think in the old world, going back to where we started, right? In the industrial revolution, we used to optimize like supply chain. We'll optimize ERPs. We'll have CRMs, right? Marketing, sales, service. Then we'll do some UX, UI design. We'll have applications, and you can buy it from the app store. We will have channel management. We'll have omni channels. This is really saying, really kind of slice it this way, right? Instead of going like this, as an entrepreneur, just either you're plugged into this ecosystem, or if you're orchestrating it, that's what you're trying to orchestrate. So if you look at every single example I gave you, going back to the agriculture example, right? That's what is happening, is that for the first time, we are able to utilize the tech stack to actually connect the dots, if you will, end to end. And even if it's like I'm just taking a payment, okay? Uh, what form of payment? How do I pay? Where do I pay? Right? Can I buy now, pay later, etc. Right? That is, I think, the innovation that's happening, and that you're able to now stitch together all these different opportunities, and that's mini ecosystem, right? As opposed to very broad things like, okay, I'm going to provide software as a service here, or service as software here, etc. Which I think now slowly people are realizing, and that's kind of what we found in the book.
Amazing, amazing. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think now we'll move to the Siemens piece because we did a B2C deep dive. Would love to know what's happening at Siemens and maybe just like unpacking the entire piece. Would love
Yeah,
to
now
hear that.
Siemens
Yeah.
actually brings up another aspect of co-intelligent enterprise that we haven't talked about, and that is digital twin.
Hmm.
So you have the AI factory infrastructure at the bottom, broadly speaking. There's a lot of, like I said, plays there for startups. But really, if you look at these larger companies, they're trying to connect that with all of their, like I said, these end-to-end experiences. So at every part of the value chain, there is like something missing. What is missing is, while I can say, okay, I want to create this experience, let me see how that can flow through. The reality is things change very, very rapidly, right? We live in a highly dynamic world, right? So what is happening is digital twins have always been there, just like AI has been there for a long time. But digital twins have been, I mean, digital twin, just for everyone, it's a representation of the real world, right? It's a digital representation of the real world. It could be a representation of like a process in this chain. I think that's one of the simplest ways of looking at it, right? There is a process, but now I have a digital representation of the process. So actually, I have, every asset is in here. I, I, I shouldn't use the word asset, any entity, because it could also be a person, not just a thing. So a person, place, right? People, places, things, if you think of it that way. Uh, the ecosystem is kind of not just mapped, but it's actually like, the phrase we use in the book is, it's like a living system. It's
Hmm.
actually alive. Like if you ping any particular entity, it has kind of a status, right? Uh, and so it's one of those things where you actually have a live representation of your business. Think of it that way. That, I think, is where we're going with this. But here's where the co-intelligence comes in. I can now query it. So I can now talk to the digital twin, and then I can interact with it and see, hey, so for example, take a physical factory, right? If you have a physical factory, and Siemens, for example, builds product logic controllers in its machines, and so the machines have always done specific tasks, right? So that's always existed, the automated specific tasks. But now they are programmable, and they are actually the factory floor software defined, which means that with the push of a button, it's like my Tesla car, which got a software update actually day before yesterday. And all of a sudden, I have Grok on my wheel, which I used, which is very interesting. I just double click and I just talk to Ara, like I talk to ChatGPT, right? I can ask her about anything, including, of course, the car, but I can just have conversations with her, which is amazing. It's like ChatGPT has come to my steering wheel.
Hmm.
Which, by the way, we talk about in the book as well. Like, when is Grok coming? Well, it actually came. So I think so that was just a digression popped in my head, but I think the idea is like that, right? So I can query, I can say, hey, I can talk to the machine and say, tell me what happened last night, or I can talk at the factory level, like, where am I having issues? What are the three issues? Flag them for me, like you might ask ChatGPT, right? So Siemens has built, I think, this code named Danny, right? This thing where you could actually talk to the machines on a factory floor, but most important, you can take that entire environment, since it's a digital twin, you can then take action on it. So you can actually simulate changes. And now with agentic AI on top of generative AI, you can actually take actions. And these are actually robots. They're actually physically embedded. So there's also physical AI on the shop floor. So it seems like it may seem like, okay, now we have these different pieces coming together. No, but it is like a real-time representation, and more than a representation, uh, it is like you're actually there, quote unquote. right? Now, what makes it being there is that they have partnered with Sony, and you really have experienced this to get a feel for it. It's called immersive engineering. I can put on these goggles, and all of a sudden, I can insert myself into the environment, and I can interact with all my colleagues. Now I can always also do it like in the Zoom-like environment with the 2D representation. We can look at the factory floor. I can say, "Hey, Jerome, we're going to change the layout of that." And someone say, "Sorry, I think if you did that, it might cause a problem over here." And then you can say, "Oh, okay, let's simulate it and see if it does," right? And then say, "Oh, yeah, you're right. We're causing these things. Oh, so how do we fix that?" Right? And then you can troubleshoot and you can problem solve in real time. And BMW, for instance, does that with its iFactories, right? And so we have these examples. So we're saying this is part of a larger thing that I think is going to happen, which is every enterprise is going to have an AI factory, bottom layer, the infrastructure, the platforms. It's going to have a digital twin so that you can have, it's going to have some form of digital twin because you can now actually simulate these things. And so you can reduce your risk of taking actions because now we're all working with agents, right? Agentic AIs. So we have to ensure the agents do their job. So as you orchestrate these agentic AI layer, it's very important to keep in mind that, hey, you want to create value on top of it, right? So when I make these changes, how does value flow now in the system out there, and who gets what kind of value, and what are the impacts does it have? So that's what the Siemens example kind of brings together in terms of data, AI, what they call this industrial metaverse with this industrial foundation models that are built for engineers and factory floor workers who can, just like the farmer, just like the consumer person in L'Oréal beauty, makeup, here you're talking about the factory floor, and they can kind of affect how the equipment works in their factories. So that's kind of like the Siemens industrial example. So I think the industrial AI is also a huge area of growth in terms of the built environment. And so if you are an entrepreneur, you had worked previously, let's say in built environments with various physical assets, right? That are building models and so on, right? Or in urban planning, etc. There are lots of opportunity. We feature some of those in the book in terms of physical spaces and how they're going to be transformed.
Amazing, amazing. I think this is phenomenal. As you were speaking about the example, I was visualizing myself on factory floors because I've worked in specific factory floors as well.
Yes. Me too. I'm an engineer, so
Absolutely. So I think that's phenomenal. One quick piece which I wanted to touch upon is you spoke about, the biggest opportunities, possibly the data in the enterprises, 80% of value which can be unpacked for entrepreneurs. And how do enterprises see that? Do they look at it from the lens that we will build everything ourselves? Or are they looking at young startups to come and help them? Because it's a lot of data, right? And it's the most important thing for an enterprise. Any insights on that piece would be really valuable.
So it depends on the enterprise, but I think all the forward-looking enterprises, if you look at all the way even from NVIDIA, it has the Inception program for startups.
Yeah.
Of course, all of the hyperscalers have startup programs, AWS has. So then you go up the stack and the platform service companies, they do. Obviously, they work with developers and so on and so forth. And then you have the established companies. I think that, going back to your specific question, if you look at L'Oréal, they work a lot with startups. In fact, a lot of their innovations have come from startups. I mentioned Modiface. They have also had startups that have helped them in the sustainable space in terms of building products that are environmentally friendly or like use less water resources and so on, right? So there are some innovations that we feature in the book.
Any examples, particularly from, say, legacy industries, which did not have a tech layer, and with this introduction of AI, do you see any changes there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say did not have the tech layer, so for
Yeah.
instance, you would say Siemens was in some sense it is tech, right? They've had different forms of tech which are more domain specific tech,
Yeah.
right? But now I think what they realize is by bringing in AI, every company stands to benefit from it because, and then as you start applying it, you actually see that you may not have the capabilities, but you can partner with those that do. So I think there's also more and more willingness, or almost like a necessity. People realize why it's necessary to actually, nobody can do it alone. Because if you want to build these experiences, you really have to build the ecosystem like we discussed, right? Through multiple partnerships. So there's lots of opportunities for companies to plug in. The question is, does this established enterprise, do they see themselves as an orchestrator, or they see themselves participating in another ecosystem? So there are different models, different ways in which they participate. And then, of course, there's the whole, even at the AI model level, there is open models, open weights, then you have uh, closed models, etc. But I think in general, you'll find that there is a lot of openness to from established companies figuring out how to partner with startups. And sometimes you actually have a startup that facilitates that, right? Like who actually is going to be that orchestrator? I think that's an interesting question. Sometimes it's coming from the established company side. Sometimes it comes from the startup side. Sometimes it's facilitated by the government, like in those digital public infrastructure things. And then, people are building applications on top of it. And
Got
then
it.
established companies are also participating. So both established and startup companies participate in the fintech space, the agri space, like we discussed, etc.
Got it. So I think I have two final questions before we wrap this. Like you did say, there's a lot of openness and necessity largely for enterprises, but is there also fear? Like what are enterprises thinking? Like what is the challenges and
Absolutely.
fear? Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, there are huge challenges because when we talk about value, the phrase we use in the book is risk managed value.
Hmm.
So the first thing that will come up is as I train these models, enterprises have grown up with like their crowns, the jewel in the crown, so to speak, the crown jewels, uh, is the proprietary data. So I think what is happening now is that uh, as it goes into the enterprise, data is actually not the issue because the consumer space with these publicly trained models, you have started from the internet, and that's given us these LLMs. But now, as you take these enterprise applications, it is really saying, how do I use that enterprise data, right? So if you look at a lot of the examples, there are various things like RAG and so on, right? Where the Siemens example I gave you, or L'Oréal, the inside use of the AI. In all of these cases, what you'll see, and we discussed this in the book, is that uh, they're using the LLMs. You take JP Morgan Chase, they have a whole LLM studio, thousands of employees are trained on it. But in building that, they started the foundation models, but they have essentially tuned it to their domain, right? The context. Now, what do I mean by that? Two things. One is I'm fine tuning, distilling this model. So when I prompt, you want to make sure that uh, first that when it goes to the LLM, it is already grounded in my domain. That's what happens there. And then when it gives an answer, actually there's a filtering of it, right? There's an interjection, if you will, into that process to then essentially ensure doing all of your checks so that what actually gets output, what the employee sees, for instance, right, is uh, devoid of as much hallucination as possible, or reduces the risk of responses which from an enterprise perspective is not what they want the person to experience. But at the same time, the point is that there's also the question of data leakage, right? We've all seen lots of examples of that. So in the context of enterprise data, a lot of it is that the data, it doesn't go out to the outside of the enterprise into the model or somewhere else, right? And so I think that uh, notion of building trust is very important. And so startups need to pay attention, or any company, established companies pay attention to that transparency of the AI, and making sure that the AI, right, is explainable, is responsible, right? I think one cannot underestimate that. So going back to your question, that's where there can be a lot of tentativeness, because when you look at the ROI, to prove the ROI, you have to first cross these hurdles, then go from pilot to actual full production, where there's also a big gap, right? Because you can do it on a pilot basis, but when you actually scale it up and then you cut across the systems, a lot of these risks become more tangible. So I think focusing on risk management is very crucial, and ensuring that it is compliant with the governance process of organizations. And so there's a discussion of that in the book in terms of risk management, which is very important beyond the cybersecurity, privacy, and all of those issues. These kinds of kind of strategic risk management issues are very crucial from an enterprise adoption perspective.
Got it. So I think you kind of covered most of the pieces which I had in my final question. The final question was specifically for Indian entrepreneurs building in AI. Are there any specific tips or advice you would have, specifically selling to global enterprises, maybe in the US markets and the Middle East, etc.? Besides what you've just said, specifically for Indian entrepreneurs.
So I would say something very simple actually, which is, and let me give you the kind of reasoning behind this,
Mhm.
which comes from what I'm seeing in terms of pitch decks.
Okay.
Okay. So in the old model, companies, startups would come and then they would raise round of funds, say, hey, I want to start this. What I'm finding now, the more successful startups doing, and therefore, this is kind of what I'm drawing from, is that they are building prototypes because you can very rapidly build prototypes today. So I would urge people not. So in other words, you used to have a whole thing here where the deck, and then I use the funds to build the prototype, but this is getting compressed very fast. And so the more successful startups actually, when they are going to raise, they're actually showing a working prototype already. Like the venture capitalists can actually play with it, right?
Yeah.
That's a very different experience for the venture capitalist. So speaking of experience, it's a different venture capitalist experience. You see what I'm saying? A funding experience, broadly speaking. There are different kinds of funding, as you know. So my point is that for founders is like, how quickly can you not just prove it, have people experience the offering, okay, in some form? Because that's very important, because that also shows how fast you can build these pilot applications. Because the rubber hits the road when you get into production. And so that is a very important hurdle. The other is, if you're building something, invariably some developers will be involved. So focus on that developer experience, right? The developer experience is very, very crucial. So like we talk about the farmer experience, right? So what is the developer's experience like? And because invariably at some point you're building something and somebody's going to be building on top of it. I'm using the word developer very broadly because now there are various kinds of developers. Like we said, it's becoming more and more easier to use, right? The old low code, no code. So what I'm finding is in a lot of those applications, especially in software development itself, in that space, there are various startups. If you actually watch that space, you will see this is kind of like what's happening there, right? So people moving faster and faster, where the actual experiences can happen at scale very fast, and you can get that feedback loop going faster, so that you're actually compressing the kind of time to value, the speed to value, but you're actually realizing value for people. And so when people get that value, that's what creates a stickiness and they want more of it, right? And so that's a very positive cycle. But I've also found lots of failures because of failure to do what I've just been talking about. And so therefore, I think the startups that have an edge actually utilize AI right from the get-go, even from pitching their vision itself.
Perfect. Awesome. Professor Venkat, I think it was such a delightful chat with you. I mean, I got to learn a lot of things. Can't wait to read the book, and also would urge all the listeners and viewers to pick up a book and maybe get a lot more insights from what Professor Venkat has said. Thank you so much for your time.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.